Morning, everybody, and welcome to this second episode of the Forest Talk webinar series. This second webinar will be about EU forest policy and pathways in a changing world. And I will be introducing you to the webinar. I'm Fulvio Di Fulvio from the International Institute of Applied System Analysis, and I'm a co-coordinator of the ForestNavigator project, which is one of the three projects organizing this webinar series. The webinar series is organized together by ForestNavigator, ForestPaths and Pathfinder, and today we will have speakers from all the three projects and one external speaker join us and suggesting us some interesting findings for our pathways. This special episode is about EU forest policy and pathways in a changing world. So we will speak here about geopolitical changes and how this will affect the pathway modeling. Let's go through our agenda together. So I will give an introduction to you, and after I will hand over the webinar to my colleague from IASA, Peter Havlik, and he will give us an introduction and moderation of the speech of Sten Nilsson, which is our external speaker, and he will give us an overview on geopolitical changes and their potential impact on the forest sector and the modeling of our pathways. During this session, we'll also ask you to ask questions. So we'll have a Q&A session. This will be moderated by Peter. So you can place your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window. And you can also like questions of each other. And then we will select the most liked question and ask them to Sten and discuss them together with Sten. After the presentation from Sten and this Q&A, we will have three presentations from the three different projects. We will start with a presentation on the visions from the ForestPath project. This will be followed by a presentation on the socioeconomic drivers of our pathways from the Pathfinder project. And then we'll have a presentation on the socioeconomic output of our pathway modeling, and this will be led by the ForestNavigator project. We will close this with a panel discussion, and this panel discussion will be on poll results, and the poll will be launched during the last presentation. It will be about the socioeconomic output from the three projects. So you will have opportunity to vote for the most interesting socioeconomic outputs that you will expect from our projects. And then we'll have a closing of the webinar. And you can also place your comments in the chat, and we will try to reply also in the chat to your comments during the webinar. I will start now with a short introduction about the modeling of policy pathways in our projects. I would like to remind you what is the overall aim of these three projects together, which is to end this webinar series. The aim of the three project is to design policy pathways for European forests supporting climate, biodiversity, and bioeconomy goals. And during this webinar series, we'd like to show you how the projects provide the scientific foundation of future forest policy pathways. So what we would like to do is to increase also your thought into our policy pathways. And to do this, we created this webinar series where we try to increase your stakeholder view integration in our work. So we are all three projects together trying to develop complementary policy pathways, and we are using different also modeling platform for doing that. And all of this is trying to maximize the contribution of forests towards climate neutrality, biodiversity, and bioeconomy goals through the identification of win-win-win forest management strategies and also wood uses in the bioeconomy. We try to integrate from one side the monitoring of the forest from different sources together with the forest management options, but also wood uses in the bioeconomy. And we try to look also at the different interactions with biodiversity and with climate change, considering also how biodiversity can increase the resilience of our forests. And of course, we also have a strong stakeholder interaction with this webinar series, but also another series of events like workshop together with the stakeholders where we try to co-design our solutions. To understand more of this concept of the pathways, we need to start to look at the forest sector policy pathway and what is the underneath concepts. First of all, we need to think about goals. And what is a common goal across the three projects is to maximize EU forest sector contribution to EU climate neutrality by 2050. And we have visions. And the vision is to achieve the climate neutrality goal while maximizing synergies between forest sector contribution to climate, biodiversity, and the bioeconomy. Once we have a goal and we have a vision, then we can design a pathway to achieve our goal, considering our vision. And the pathway is then the roadmap, which outlines the sequence of steps and policy actions which are required to realize the vision and achieve ultimately the goal. At EU level, we have already a pathway for all the different economic sectors going towards climate neutrality, as is a decarbonization pathway. And we know that in this decarbonization pathway, we have a LULUCF sector, which play a role in compensating the emission from all other sectors. And by 2050, this sector should compensate the remaining emissions from the others. In particular, the forest sector is very relevant because within this LULUCF is the one providing the largest sink and is expected to play a key role in this decarbonization. However, we are now in a situation where we can observe that recently there's been a decline in the forest sector sink, and we have still a goal of increasing the contribution from this sector. At the same time, we'd like also to increase the sector contribution to conserve biodiversity and sustaining the growth of the bioeconomy. So we are in a very complex dilemma. So how we can design these future pathways? First of all, we need to model and understand alternative socioeconomic developments and alternative managements and wood uses. This is done through, first of all, exploratory scenario and cases, where we look at these different alternatives. As an example, you have an exploratory scenario case 1, where we try to change management in the forest, or we try to increase the conservation or restoration ambition, or you will have an exploratory case 2, where you see increasing the lifetime of harvested wood products or the other type of solution. And we will formulate a series of these alternative scenarios, cases, and including different options, both in the management and the bioeconomy. And once we have all these cases, we will model them and understand how the different cases will deliver in the future. And then we will combine the most promising options together to design the pathway. So we will combine the most promising results in a policy pathway, which describes the action and the timing to achieve our goal. And this will be our forest sector policy pathway to climate neutrality. And each project will try to do this, and we will look into synergies together. Now that we have another issue. We have really recently, we are experiencing significant geopolitical changes, which are affecting how the EU and the rest of the world will evolve, especially in terms of socioeconomic drivers. And we need to understand better which type of threats and opportunities are emerging from these changes. And now we can capture these changes in our pathways. That's why we will start now with an overview of these changes together with our external speaker, Sten Nilsson. And I will give now the floor to my colleague from IASA, Peter Havlik, and he will be moderating the discussion with Sten. And Peter Havlik is a program director at the International Institute of Applied System Analysis, and is together with me the co-coordinator of the ForestNavigator project. Please, Peter, and he will be moderating the cases and then options. Please, Mikko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fulvio. So as Fulvio told, I'm going to tell about ForestPaths stakeholder work and development of policy pathways for the forest sector of Europe. And one like essential part of that is creating visions for the forest sector. So the stakeholders are in central role in this process, and we have been organizing a series of policy labs aiming at creating these visions and later also the policy pathways for Europe. They all target at reaching EU's climate goals, but they could do that in very different ways depending on how the future is seen by the stakeholders in different visions. So after presenting these visions, I'm going to tell how our exploratory scenario work will serve the development of final policy pathways. So in the past two policy labs, our stakeholders created three alternative visions for the EU's forest sector, and we take them as input for the further development of policy pathways. How they will be exactly implemented in the policy pathways hasn't been exactly decided yet because the work is still ongoing. So if we take a look at the main features of the visions, we see that they represent quite different views of the desired development of the forest sector. The first one, people, planet, profit vision, resembles like a classic bioeconomy vision where production and technology are essential components. The second one, the better forests for all, sees forests serving multiple purposes. Decreases of production are also anticipated, but having more forests compensates it. The last vision focuses on the traditions and culture and bringing forests close to people in Europe. So if we take a slightly closer look at the main differences, we notice that the first one, the people, planet, profit, sees forest production important, and it's also important component for the mitigation. Land that's good for production should be also maintained in production. Diversity is also important, but mainly for adaptation and supporting forestry in the long term. The vision Better Forests for All has strongest view on climate and biodiversity goals. Landscape everywhere should offer these and other ecosystem services. Forestry should also be motivating and a source of income through multiple different ecosystem services. The last one of our visions sees forest clearly different. Cultural aspects and human-nature relationship are appreciated. Biodiversity elements should penetrate everywhere. Wood is also seen valuable, and a small-scale forestry should also have room. These visions have also much in common. All mentioned sustainable use of wood, long-lived wood products. Diversity is also considered in every vision, but what it really means may differ by the action. So this was about our visioning work so far, but ForestPaths also investigates the impacts of individual mitigation options, which we call exploratory cases. So usefulness of these options will be evaluated based on their impact on mitigation, wood production, biodiversity, and different land use trade-offs, particularly for the agricultural production. Yes, there's some elements missing. So in the second stage, we will combine the knowledge of the impacts of promising exploratory cases to the visions that were created by the stakeholders. That will be done also by the stakeholders who will combine different exploratory cases to the visions and continue developing the policy pathway, which will define the eventual time-dependent steps required for reaching the EU's goals. So if we take a look at the different options that we are, or different exploratory cases we are testing, the first set of cases considers actions and options that involve land use change somehow, meaning mainly protection, restoration, and afforestation actions. They lead to supply-driven changes in forest production. Two of those, particularly the protection and restoration, could be powerful mitigation options in the short term and really help reaching EU's climate goals, but they have also negative impacts for the bioeconomy, and they might also have negative impacts on the mitigation later in the century. So these will be evaluated with models explicitly, considering and integrating simulations of different land uses and economy. So the second set of cases considers different forest management options and their impacts on forest-based mitigation, structure, and diversity. These cases are forced changes in management practices of forests as of 2025. They will lead to supply-driven changes in forest growth and structure, and the impacts will be evaluated with forest-oriented models participating in our project. The third set of cases considers different options for wood use, meaning how the product lifetimes and substitution possibilities affect the mitigation, and how the impacts of timber demand affect the mitigation possibilities in the forests. These impacts will be evaluated with forest sector modeling combined with life cycle analysis. So all in all, giving stakeholders information about promising mitigation options, they are then better prepared for the co-creation of these policy pathways. We will continue this co-creation work in our third policy lab that is due autumn this year. And hopefully we will get far with the development of policy pathways. So I will leave it to here. Thanks a lot for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikko, for your presentation. Now we will move to the second presentation from the projects. This is from the Pathfinder project, and it's from Daniel Di Marzo. He's a researcher at the Albert Ludwigs University of Freiburg. He will present us about the socioeconomic drivers of our policy pathways with an overview compiled together by the three projects. Please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fulvio. And please apologize, there might be some overlap with Professor Nilsson's presentation, but hopefully we cover it and incorporate it quite well. So of course, talking about forests, they are, of course, a central component of Europe's transition toward the climate neutral and sustainable future. However, this transition doesn't happen in isolation. A range of exogenous factors must be considered when developing our models, ensuring that the policy pathways we develop with stakeholders are realistic and useful for policymakers. So across the three projects, we asked which of these exogenous socioeconomic drivers are most relevant in shaping the future EU forest policy pathways, and then furthermore, of these factors, which can be integrated into our models. So we considered three major categories of socioeconomic drivers that directly impact EU forest management, and the first one is global socioeconomic developments and international policies, which was heavily mentioned also in Professor Nilsson's presentation. But nonetheless, we identified 4 key components. So first of all, economic growth and population trends. A growing economy and an increasing population means rising demand for wood-based products, but at the same time, economic downturns could reduce demand and shift trade dynamics. Secondly, we highlight global trade dynamics. The EU's position in global wood markets is influenced by trade barriers, tariffs, import-export policies. I don't need to go into this very much because it was well covered by Professor Nilsson, but also the EU deforestation regulation as well, which restricts import linked to deforestation, can also shift market supply chains. The dynamics of the energy sector, also with green energy, bioenergy, is becoming a critical alternative to fossil fuels. However, how forests are used for energy production, competing with other clean and not so clean energy sources, raises important considerations. And then lastly, of course, the global biodiversity commitments, initiatives like the 3030 policy, which aim to protect 30% of global land and ocean areas, could restrict forest exploitation, influencing land use conservation efforts and forestry economics and management. So all of these global developments set the stage for how EU's internal markets respond. And here within the EU, evolving consumer preferences, technological innovations, and sustainable goals are changing how forests are managed. Firstly, we identify the bioenergy and market-based demand shifts. This is part of the EU's Green Deal, which is increasing demand of wood-based alternatives in construction, bioplastics, and textiles, to name a few. This shift could boost the forestry sector, but also create competition for raw materials. Another factor is the circular economy and wood use, which we hope, as Professor Nilsson would be increasing in the next years, would increase recycling and extend the lifespan of wood products. Policies supporting circularity will also affect production and consumption patterns. Technological innovations in wood processing. So these emerging technologies are making wood stronger, more versatile, and competitive against traditional materials. These innovations, if scaled up, could lead to new product markets and economic opportunities for the wood-based sector. And then lastly, consumer behavior and economic incentives. So here we see 3 kind of broader questions. Are consumers willing to pay more for sustainable products? Will industries adapt to carbon pricing mechanisms? And could taxes on deforestation push companies to change their sourcing strategies? So then these factors directly shape the economics forest sector within Europe, which leads then to the supply side. And the supply side factors determine how wood is available, how it is sourced, and at what cost. So importantly, we recognize climate change and natural disturbances, acknowledging the increased frequency of fires, droughts, storms, and bark beetles, to name a few, that are direct or indirect externalities of climate change. These events threaten wood supply and forest health. The EU's environmental regulation, such as the Natural Restoration Law, aims to restore degraded ecosystems. This will have long-term effects on forestry management and policy. And finally, financial mechanisms supporting the forest sector. The EU provides subsidies for reforestation, carbon storage, and ecosystem services. The payments for ecosystem service ensure forests are valued not just for wood production, but also for cultural, recreational, and their climate benefits. So all in all, these factors mentioned above, or drivers, economic, regulatory, environmental, cultural, and technological, combine to shape the future of EU forest sector. By understanding these drivers, we can hope to design policy pathways for stakeholders and policymakers that are robust, forward-looking, and adaptable to different future EU forest scenarios. And now I pass it on to the next presenter.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your very informative overview. And now we will move to the last presentation from the 3 projects. And this is from Dr. William van Zijt from the Wageningen University Research. He will present on behalf of the ForestNavigator project First of all, you will provide us an overview on the socioeconomic outputs from the three projects, so which potential outputs can be expected, and then it will show us an example of scenarios where are modeled some of the socioeconomic indicators with some very preliminary results. Please, William, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I hope you all can hear me. Good afternoon. Yeah, so there's going to be, again, a little bit of an overlap with the previous talks, because also I'm going to showcase a little bit what kind of outputs we are going to look at. But then, of course, because we have got these complex models, sometimes the driver for one model will be the output for the other model. So there will be a bit of an overlap. But in general, just starting from the big picture, so we want to look at the contribution of the forest sector to the EU economy. So we can look at the future pathways and how this will affect the value added of the forest sector, but also the employment situation. And of course, this was also quite clear in Dr. Nilsson's presentation, the position and the competitiveness of the EU forest sector within the global situation is, of course, developing, and we'd like to shed some light on that by looking also at changes in trade and in the international economy, the production volumes of the EU versus the rest of the world, for example. Then, of course, we want to dive a bit deeper into the output related to the EU markets, and very basically, we then start looking at the production volumes and prices and things like that of the forest sector, but also, as mentioned earlier, the circular economy status and how we can model outputs for that. Disturbances, extreme events, things were also already mentioned by Daniel, so there's an overlap there in the outputs as well that we want to see, of course, and hopefully within the whole mitigation, conservation parts of the pathways, we can look into the competition with agriculture, but also the costs that are related with that. Finally, and I'm going through this relatively quickly, we also, all projects are also looking at the ecosystem services and the values that they provide. And we have various outputs across the different projects that relate to this. And then, of course, both the combination of the carbon sequestration type of values, but also the cultural, recreational, and landscape values there. Now, this was a bit of a quick overview, but we did want to ask everybody here for feedback in a poll to give us your opinion and contributions on your opinion on what the important aspects are of the forest sector to contribute to the EU economy and prosperity. I think there should be a poll popping up right now. I think I see it's happening. Yes. So I'll continue with my talk just to give an overview of the specific model results. But in the meanwhile, you can still look at this poll, and we'll come back to that after my brief talk. And then hopefully what I'm going to show will inspire you to perhaps also fill in the open-ended question at the end with things that we might have missed when it comes to the 4 answers that are available there. Okay, so I'm going to showcase a little bit of this is quite exploratory, so I want to make sure that these are not definitive scenarios yet, but this is just a showcase of the kind of output that we can provide, and specifically on the global macroeconomic assessments that we do with the so-called magnet model, this model that we employ at Wageningen Social and Economic Research. And this is a global general equilibrium model, but with a focus on agriculture and bioeconomy. And especially within the ForestNavigator project, we're adding quite a bit of details on the forest sectors there. Magnet is a bit particular in that it's always a global model. So you'll see on the left-hand side here the regional setup that we have for the current scenarios that we see with, you see quite some details here on the member state focus, but then the rest of the world is a little bit more aggregated. And just to give an idea of the type of drivers, at least in the magnet model for the core baseline setup, so a typical scenario till 2050 has mostly the GDP and the population and then employment as drivers. And that's basically the only thing that gets thrown to the model besides some scenario IDs. And then we have projections of global trade and production volumes and things like that coming out of the model based on the current dynamics. And then, oh, sorry, I was going a bit faster. So we're looking here at a combination scenario that's a bit stylized, but that was majorly showcased to showcase the increased wood demand scenarios. I want to come back later, perhaps briefly. We also are looking into scenarios with more high circularity and more recycling and things like that, that would perhaps not necessitate an increase of wood demand. But for now, just for the showcase, I'm looking at scenarios with quite focus on increasing wood demand. And one lever is there, the increased lumber use in the construction sector, which was already talked about by Dr. Nilsson as well. And this more innovative use of wood or pulp, usually in the wood-based textiles. And then just in general, increase of bioenergy based on wood pellets. And then I combine this in the graphs that I'll show just quickly as a total high bioeconomy scenario. And you'll see here the wood-based quantities that then come out of the model when we implement these kind of scenarios. And this is work that's been developed within the ForestNavigator project to really try to make the global macroeconomic model a bit more aware of the quantity-based forest quantities. So one thing is that this construction sector increases then the industrial roundwood demand quite a bit. And you'll see here on the right-hand side, over in the graphs, of course, this increase of the roundwood volume demand and the amount that's produced by the European forests in the different scenarios. And you see that in the baseline, we already project a decent increase, but it becomes even higher in this scenarios of increased wood demand. And what we'll see in our particular implementation, this wood-based textile quantities are relatively small in the start, so they have a relatively limited impact, but the bigger impacts are from the bioenergy and from this construction sector increased demand. So when we can then dive into a little bit more is for example, the value added of these three sectors. And I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it here, but these are the primary forestry sectors, the paper and pulp sectors, and the wood product sector. And you see that in the baseline situation, it increases, the value added increases from 2017, which is our base data, to 2050. And in the high bioeconomy scenario, it increases even more. But then if you look at the value added contribution to the GDP, you see that by 2050, that actually decreases over time. And this because of the general macroeconomic dynamics that the services sector will increase more, for example, things like that. So you'll see that still, even in the higher bioeconomy scenario, there is a decrease in relative contribution to the economy compared to the now, but at least it's mitigated a bit relative to the normal situation. What I'm not showing here is all the interaction with other sectors, but I'll leave that for another time, or I can refer to some of the deliverables that we're working on in case you're interested in that. I think I need to go a little bit faster, but just as an indication of what kind of outputs we can show here is that, of course, we have the primary production is increasing, and in Magnet we express everything in million US dollars. So you see that the production in the EU goes up quite a bit, but we do see that in this particular scenario, we kind of assume that the EU will be able to catch most of that production, but so the intra-trade in the EU is going up quite a bit, and then the general exports are still increasing over time, also in the baseline and also in this high bioeconomy scenario. Some final graphs is that we can look at the employment dynamics, so to say. So you see the left-hand side is the firm labor demand in dollars, and then the middle one is the actual workers employed. And you see that in the baseline scenario, you see the dotted line here is just the wood product sector, and then the solid line is the primary forestry sector. And you see in the baseline scenarios, employment is projected to go down, and that's mostly to do with increasing labor productivity. And you do see that the value added per worker is still steadily increasing over time, which also indicates rising wages and rising labor productivity. What you then see is that, for example, at least in the high bioeconomy scenarios, the total employment actually stabilizes somewhat over time. And this was going to be, so just summarizing. So I just wanted to share some socioeconomic indicators under different, like these high wood demand scenarios. Of course, what we haven't done here really is so one thing we haven't looked at too much in detail in this presentation is the connection with the high recycling scenarios, for example. Of course, so we of course want to look at quite some more scenarios, and then more detailed indicators to look at, like the bilateral trade patterns and things like that. But I think it's good that you stopped me, because I think I was getting near to my limit in any case. So I'll see there, and then perhaps we'll have some interesting poll results to look at. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, William, for your overview and your early results. And now we'll move back to Peter and to comment together with Sten on the results of the poll. Please, can we see the results from the poll? And you have still some moments to vote, to cast your vote in the poll.
Anyway, in the meantime, the question was, how relevant are the following contributions from the forest sector to EU prosperity by 2050? And the options were either a cheap decarbonization through wood-based products, which could potentially relieve the pressure for decarbonization in other sectors. Then the regional GDP increase from forestry and wood-based industries. Then employment opportunities in forestry and wood industries. And finally, economic growth and employment from cultural and recreational activities. So I think the answers are quite balanced. So far, 25 of the 67 participants participated in the poll. And the highest ranked is the first option, a source of cheap decarbonization through wood-based products. So maybe Professor Nilsson, as we have last few minutes, I would take this last part with you again, if I may, because we have seen also in some of the other questions the kind of questioning of the carbon sequestration in the forest versus the mobilization and potentially storage of the carbon in the wood-based products. Do you see any space for complementarity for mobilizing additional biomass from the forest without reducing the carbon sequestration? Or maybe on the other hand, given the risks to which the forests are exposed, is it actually even a safer way how to store the carbon in the products rather than in the forests directly? Do you have any thoughts about this? And maybe about the question in general. And you are muted.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I have been looking into the questions here, and I see that this is an issue. I think you shouldn't shy away from the issue of a situation that if we are going to implement the Green Deal, it means that we will have a deficit of wood of around 130 million cubic meters in addition to what we have today. So the first question is what kind of negative effects will the full implementation of a Green Deal, or if I say that if we are looking at the forest carbon, if we are implementing that fully out, what will the socioeconomic effects be? It may be that you should put your efforts into something else instead of the forest carbon side in order to avoid severe socioeconomic impacts. So that's one side of it. I think we are working too little with the trade-offs in this system, and that is what we have to illustrate. What are the trade-offs? What are the consequences? Secondly, if you're going into the bioeconomy in the way I see it, you are generating higher values, as Willem Jan said, and I liked that presentation a lot. And by that, you are using the fiber more efficient, and you are can be in a situation that you're losing less wood, and that means that you have the possibility to store more carbon in the forest. Punkt.
Okay, thank you very much. And you already referred to some of the presentations and clearly gave very important messages for the next steps in our projects. But as final words, based on what you have seen or on your reflections, are there any last messages for carrying these projects forward, or also for the broad audience of this seminar before we hand over back to Fulvio?
Really have a holistic approach.
Yes, I think that's a very good conclusion. Also, again, reminding us of your long-term employer, the Institute for Systems Analysis, which we need to mainstream also here. So, Professor Nilsson, thank you very much again for your participation throughout this seminar.
Thank you.
Okay, with this, Fulvio, for your conclusion.
Thank you, Peter. We are already over time, and thank you very much, all of you, for staying with us until the end. Still, we have 68 participants online, which is very good, especially because many places is already lunchtime this. So let's summarize this webinar. Today, we are at the second webinar of this series, and we'll have another webinar in the spring 2026. And the next webinar will be organized by the ForestPaths projects, of course, with the collaboration also of the other two projects, but the lead will be for ForestPaths. The webinar recording will be shared soon with you, so in the coming weeks. And please stay tuned on the project's social channels for more information about the project's developments. At the same time, I seen we had a lot of questions in the chat, and we didn't reply all of them. So we will also, together with Sten, try to reply to other questions which are in the Q&A section, and we will find a way to forward those replies to you. So thank you again for posting your interesting question, but now we are quite over time, and we will continue by email with this. So I would like to thank you all the three projects for their very valuable contribution to this webinar. And I would like to thank you, Sten, for his very great contribution to this. And thank you all for your attention. And I wish you a good continuation of your day, and see you in our next webinar in the spring 2026. Have you all a nice day, and bye-bye.